In a remote coastal town in Cornwall, in the southwest of England, 32-year-old Kirby Noden vanished. She was never found. Her boyfriend, Dean Lowe, had killed her.
Dean had smashed Kirby around the head with the rock with such force that it had shattered into pieces.
They were together for such a long time. She must have loved him. She must have, in some weird way.
How on earth do you do what Dean did, which was to dismember that body and dispose of it, and then to carry on living as if nothing had happened?
Dean and Kirby, although they had a chaotic relationship, I always believed that they loved each other and that they were made for each other.
You don't do that to somebody and expect people to still see you as human. You're a monster.
Dean was perceived as the nightmare of the family. I still care about him. Family's important, and we were all close as kids, and family's family, isn't it?
On April 23, 2018, Dean Lowe was put on trial at Truro Crown Court for the murder of his long-term girlfriend, Kirby Noden.
I'm Lucy Clark-Billings, and I'm a journalist. I covered this case at the time. The atmosphere in court was incredibly sad. I thought I was going to report on a case that would be very gruesome and very grisly, but I had absolutely no idea I was going to be listening to this.
Kirby had been murdered using blunt trauma. Her body had lain there for a couple of days, and then he'd made a decision that he had to get rid of her body. And he made the decision that the easiest way to dispose of Kirby would be for him to dismember her.
Despite confessing to the murder, both to Rebecca and other family members and to the police officer at the scene of the crime, Dean shocked everyone by pleading not guilty.
His defence in court was that Kirby and a gentleman that she was seeing had come and filled colostomy bags full of Kirby's blood and sprayed these colostomy bags all around the room, and then that he'd raped him and then moved to South Africa together. I've absolutely no idea where it's come from.
That was one of the strangest things I've ever reported on. It wasn't just the murder itself, which was awful to witness and awful to report on, but it was this fantasy thread that went through the whole trial, him claiming it was all a big setup and that Kirby was at fault.
It's probably just a drug-induced fantasy that he's had, maybe to try and help himself deal with what he's done.
Perhaps his mental health was so poor and his drug use had been so prolific for so long that he wasn't in touch with reality anymore and he had no idea what he was doing.
Didn't think that anything like that would ever happen within my family. It's a bizarre situation to be in.
Dean Lowe was born in 1985 and grew up in the county of Cheshire, just 45 minutes outside of Manchester.
My name is Rebecca Tilford and I'm Dean Lowe's cousin. He's my older cousin by 3 years. Dean and I grew up about an hour and a half away from each other, but we were together quite regularly. I'd go and stay with my nana during school holidays and he'd come and stay with our nana as well. My biggest memories of Dean is him being a big character, protective, loud. He always into mischief. He wasn't the best behaved, but he had a good heart down below. We were quite a close-knit family. We always made the effort to all get together. These photos are from one of my fondest memories that I've actually got with Dean. And the coal man used to come and deliver coal for the fires. So Dean, being the cheeky little lad he was like, come on, should we get in there? And we managed to break into the coal scuttle and we were just absolutely covered in coal dust. And my nana was looking after us at the time, so she wasn't very happy with the cleaning that needed doing afterwards.
Dean had quite a troubled start in life, and he was taken into foster care when he was just a few months old. As a child, Dean was actually quite funny, outgoing, the class clown.
As a child, he was the naughty one. I can remember he took me swimming once and he was like, hold your breath under the water for as long as you can. So I held my breath under the water for as long as I can. And then when I started to come back up, he pushed me back under the water and held me there. It's one of them memories that I'll always have growing up that just didn't sit right, really, but...
Another person close to Dean was Kirby Noden.
She actually knew Dean from when she was very young. Their parents were friends. So they grew up in the same sort of crowds, went to the same sort of schools. When they were 14, that's when they started dating for the first time.
They did spend the majority of the time together on the park that we used to hang around on. She absolutely idolised him, she really did. He was her world. Like, even back then when we were young, she just loved him. You could tell that straight away.
It's that first real serious relationship as teenagers where Kirby's really infatuated. There's this real first flush of first love that means so much to both of them at this point.
Kirby was a lovely young girl.
You could go to Kirby and tell her anything and she wouldn't judge her, she wouldn't tell anybody. I was close friends with her, yeah, I thought the world of her.
She's been described as funny, quite quiet, artistic and fun to be around. Dean, on the other hand, was more of a wild child. He had more of an outgoing personality. And this is something that I think Kirby was attracted to.
Kirby was nothing like Dean. Kirby was just so innocent and kind and lovely.
Around the age of 14, Dean started to experiment with drugs, smoking cannabis.
He was making can bongs, so he'd got a can and poked holes in it, and he was doing that under a bridge, and I'm thinking, wow, what the hell?
Dean's behavior also started to become more aggressive to others.
My uncle gave me a call and said, look, is there any chance Dean can come and stay with you for a couple of weeks? I need him to get out of the way. He's had a fight with somebody and he's bit somebody's nose off. I was absolutely shocked and mortified, yes, because that's not the kind of behaviour that I'd used to be around.
There's a component of real aggression and violence and a way of expelling that level of energy onto something or someone in order for him to feel better, to feel a sense of relief.
Dean and Kirby, from about 14 to 20, this was a very on-again, off-again relationship. Sometimes they were together and things were great. Sometimes they were apart and not in contact as much.
They did split up for a while and then Kirby got with somebody else.
With Kirby out of his life, Dean felt lost. And at the age of 25, he committed another violent act. This time, much closer to home.
There was an incident with a close female family member getting cheated on by her partner, and she expressed feelings of hurt to Dean, and Dean, in his eyes, whether he thought he was protecting this family member or not, he went to the extreme of going round to this guy's house and he stabbed him with a screwdriver. And then when this guy was passed out on the floor from the screwdriver, Dean put a telly on his head and walked out of the situation.
He seems to show little to no remorse, empathy. He finds a way to justify his very aggressive, very violent behaviour.
I think in Dean's mind, he thought he was using violence to protect people, yes. Very, very extreme violence for the scenario, but I think in his mind, He thought he was doing the right thing.
Kirby had had a child with another partner while away from Dean, but things had not worked out. In 2010, Dean and Kirby got back together.
They referred to one another as their soulmates. This was a couple who were incredibly invested in each other. She knew he had his troubles, but they really were in it together. And they felt as though it was them against the world.
Although they had a chaotic relationship, I always believed that they loved each other and that they were made for each other. They were happy. They had a child together. After that child was born, there was a few issues, and the baby got taken away by social services.
By this time, Dean's drug taking had spiraled out of control.
It was something he started dabbling in when he was a teenager, and then it escalated as he reached his 20s. Kirby was concerned with the level of heroin use on Dean's part.
It wasn't long before Kirby was also taking hard drugs.
I know Dean would experiment with anything. I think Kirby was more led by Dean in that respect, though.
Dean and Kirby were leading a nomadic lifestyle. They were already involved in drugs, heroin. They enjoyed it. And no matter where they went, the people around them, they always knew where to get drugs from. So their lifestyle suited them.
They were living together, but they were living on the streets.
This is someone who she really trusted. She really believed that he'd look after her. She was willing to sort of leave everything behind to follow this man because she loved and cared about him so deeply.
In 2011, Dean Lowe and Kirby Noden were homeless and addicted to drugs. They decided to leave their home county of Cheshire and move 250 miles away to Devon.
I've absolutely no idea why they picked Devon. I mean, it's not somewhere that he ever went a lot as a child, nor Kirby, as far as I'm aware. I just think it was probably the furthest place they could go to get away from everything. Dean's foster mother had died, Dean's dad had died, and our nana had died at that point as well, so there was nobody else for Dean in Cheshire.
Though they were hundreds of miles apart, Rebecca stayed in touch with her cousin and close friend Kirby, often chatting with her online.
It was the most consistent way of being able to keep in contact with them. They didn't have the mobile phones for very long. They never really had a fixed address. It was just sofas and doorways and wherever they were. I do believe that Kirby could have gone home whenever she wanted, but Kirby didn't want to leave Dean. They seemed quite happy with their little life that they had going on there.
There were these brief glimmers of hope, maybe what their life could be like if they were to get clean and be happy together. And that can keep you with the wrong person for a very long time.
Their drug addiction became their daily fixation.
There were three people in that relationship because it was Dean, Kirby, and the drugs. That the drugs were always ever present in their relationship. And it's what sort of kept them together as well, that struggle, the sort of the highs and the lows.
Kirby had messaged me quite a few times saying that she'd tried to get clean of the heroin, but that she was struggling because Dean was still so far into it. I was worried about them and the way that they were living, but I knew there's nothing that I could have done to have changed that, so just tried to check in on them as much as I could.
In 2012, the couple got help from a drug addiction charity and managed to wean themselves off heroin for a while, before relapsing and starting on other drugs.
Synthetic drugs cause your mind to lose reality. And you can't separate the reality from what is happening in your mind. Your hallucinations are as real as if it was happening.
They had a very erratic, chaotic way of living. So one day they could be out walking the dogs, the next day they could be high on drugs and causing trouble.
In 2013, Dean and Kirby made their way to the neighboring county of Cornwall, where they moved around different towns, sometimes living off the streets or in a shelter.
My name is Ellie Gerard Hart, and I was an old neighbour of Kirby and Dean in Launceston.
Ellie, age 19, moved into the apartment beneath them and remembers meeting Kirby.
She was very bubbly, very northern, big smile. Kind-hearted, I thought. I didn't understand why she was with Dean. It didn't seem like he was all there at all. The whole time I lived there, I hardly spoke to him.
Ellie soon became friends with Kirby, who now seemed to want a more normal life. But Dean had other ideas.
Kirby wanted her daughter back, and she wanted to go to work and earn some money and she'd get off the drugs, essentially. Within 3 weeks of me sort of moving in, I would hear him beating her at night. Kirby would be screaming, crying, and one thing that Dean used to say quite a lot was, "I'll end you. I will end you." I struggled with that quite a lot, and I did go up there and confront him a couple of times.
Things now with Kirby and Dean seem to have taken a very dark turn, fueled by the increasing amounts of drugs and alcohol that they are both taking.
When someone's got that level of control over you, scared of what they're going to do, the repercussions. What if you do leave? You know, what if you try to leave and something happens?
In one instance, Dean's violent behavior was brought into Ellie's home.
I hear the door upstairs and I hear them screaming and Kirby come down the stairs, and it just sounded like a rumble down the stairs. I came out and she had picked herself up off the floor, and I just said, "Come in here for a minute." And then I hear Dean come down the stairs, and then he's banging on the door. And I went to the door and I held it open a little bit and I said, "What do you want?" And he was like, "Can you get Kirby, please?" And I was like, "No, I'm calling the police, I've had enough." And then I tried to close the door, and that's when he put his foot in the door and tried to shove the door open. And then she went back upstairs.
Taking drugs, heroin, creates imbalances within the people. Tempers become short, and any small point of friction can suddenly become a main focus, and huge arguments develop, and even sometimes steps over into violence.
Knowing that she'd reported Dean to the police, Kirby stopped speaking to her friend.
I do think Kirby would have spoken to me if she felt safe enough. I think he told Kirby not to come down to mine anymore. No abuser wants people talking to who they're abusing.
Things came to a head when Ellie noticed water dripping down her walls.
For like 2 days, it just kept going and going. It's starting to smell, there's mold, like, what do I do? And that's when I said to the letting agent, "You need to get me out of here." I think he just left the taps running. I think Dean was, "I'm gonna get rid of her, and the best thing I can do is flood her out."
Ellie never saw or heard from Kirby or Dean again. Their behavior started to become more erratic, and the couple began to distance themselves from Rebecca.
Sometimes they'd go months and months without speaking to people. Sometimes the images that they posted onto their pages were quite alarming, showing drug use or showing grainy, dark images where it was unclear what exactly was in the picture.
Kirby was unhappy. She felt like Dean was leaving her alone a lot more and cheating on her.
Kirby becomes increasingly cut off from her other family members and is now isolated from them and is fully with Dean.
In 2015, Dean and Kirby moved again. This time they settled in an apartment in the small coastal town of Marazion.
Marazion is a really lovely little community in Cornwall. It's actually a bit of a tourist hotspot, loads of art galleries, famous for its paintings and pottery, so a lovely place to visit by the sea. Maybe this would be a symbol for a new start for the both of them.
Soon after they moved in, Rebecca started receiving troubling messages from Dean.
He said that he'd got a video of somebody coming in the middle of the night and attacking them, and then he sent me a photo of his face and it was all swollen, and he said that he believed that Kirby had done it, but that she'd been mind-controlled into doing it. Just very bizarre messages. I did kind of take it with a pinch of salt. I believe it was probably the drugs talking, yeah.
In November 2016, Kirby stopped replying to Rebecca's Facebook messages.
She hadn't been active for a while, and that was really out of character for Kirby. I thought maybe they had lost their accommodation, so I wasn't too worried at first because it's not completely out of the norm for them to not be in contact for a few weeks.
3 months later, after no contact, Dean suddenly messaged Rebecca.
In the January of 2017, I got an unexpected message off Dean saying, "I'm here cause if you want to vent at me, call me on this number." But I was at work at the time. By the time I got to call the number, the line was dead. Didn't even ring. I wasn't overly concerned, but I did find it really strange. It was really out of the blue, and it wasn't in keeping with the normal messages that Dean would send. I didn't say anything to anybody at that point. Just thought maybe he was just off his head.
Months went by without Rebecca hearing from either Dean or Kirby.
I kept checking Kirby's Facebook to see whether she'd been active. There was absolutely nothing. I messaged her, "Kirby, where are you? What's going on? Please, can you get in touch?" Absolutely nothing.
In May, Rebecca was sitting at home one evening when her phone pinged.
So on the 17th of May in 2017, I received a message off Dean about 10 o'clock at night. I had a blackout, hazy argument, woke up with a body on the floor, put body in the bin, down the road. I remember cutting it up and putting it in the bin for defo. I heard the bin men find all the meat. They didn't know what it was. The carpet had to be lifted in the bedroom because of all the body matter. It was in my flat for a week. Either way, Kirby's gone. I hope for her sake the body I chopped up was fake, and a setup must have been hated for someone to go to so much. And all that blood splatter up the wall ain't a joke, something going on. He then sent me 2 photos of the room. There was blood splatter everywhere. I was shocked, sad. It's bizarre. It's not something you'd ever expect to happen ever.
Rebecca had received a shocking message from her cousin, Dean Lowe, apparently confessing to the murder of his lover, Kirby.
I think when she first received these messages, she wondered whether this was some sort of mental health episode. I don't think her mind immediately went to Kirby's died. It was the fact that no one had heard from Kirby since November.
Was this him in a delusional state? He doesn't know what's real, what's not real because of all the drug taking. What on earth is going on?
My name is Brian Hook. I'm a former homicide detective. I spent 30 years in the Metropolitan Police. My impression was the person writing this is actually not in touch with reality here. When a person like Dean has a heavy addiction, The line between reality is so blurred that in himself he probably didn't know how to separate what was reality and what was happening in his head. It's almost as if they're telling us about a nightmare, about something they think has happened but is not sure.
Although I'd seen the scene in that room, I still didn't believe at that point that Kirby was dead or that he'd killed her. I phoned my mum and I asked my mum what we should do. One of the family members phoned the police.
A police officer was sent to Dean and Kirby's apartment.
Dean answered the door. He had no top on, he had a necklace on, and on this necklace were some teeth, and he claimed that they were Kirby's teeth.
He was met with what can only be described as absolutely horrific scenes. He is very aware of the scene that greets him, which is blood spattering, blood staining, and a smell of decomposition.
They discovered a smashed up rock, like a big rock that had broken into pieces that they believed to be from force of hitting something. They found a metal bar. They found a blood-stained mattress that had been flipped over and slept in. And then obviously the scenes of the blood. There was blood everywhere.
One of the things the officer would have done almost immediately would be to arrest Dean on suspicion of murdering Kirby.
A forensic examination of the flat found life-ending amounts of blood. It was quickly determined it was Kirby's blood.
Dean had been taken to the police station for questioning, but despite the blood, there was no sign of Kirby.
Knowing Kirby as long as I have and knowing Dean as long as I have, it's hard for me to accept that she is definitely gone, because all of the messages from Dean say, I think I've killed Kirby, and they've got no body.
Once Dean was in custody, the investigation to determine what exactly had happened in the apartment could begin.
Homicides are difficult enough to investigate. When you actually don't have a body, that's just another layer of complexity. In this case, when the forensic examination of the flat is completed, the blood spatter tells the story. The other remains that are there, because the bodily fluids get onto all sorts of other things. And to try and dispose of all that is virtually impossible. So when you go through all the successive examination of that crime scene, you build up a picture.
Posters went up around the Cornish coastal community to ask the locals for help in the investigation.
When I heard that Kirby was missing, my skin just crawled. I got goosebumps. I had this horrible, horrible feeling. I knew that she wasn't alive. When I saw that she was missing, I knew then. I didn't know what happened, but I knew then that she wasn't here anymore.
From the evidence in the apartment, the police built up a picture of what Dean had done to Kirby.
In January 2017, at some point, police believe in the middle of the month, Dean murdered Kirby with a metal pole and a rock. He then dismembered her body, flushed some parts down the toilet and stuffed others into wheelie bins. He then continued to live in the flat with blood-soaked carpets and blood-soaked walls for months. Until around May, when he reached out to family members and told them what he'd done.
Homicides that involve dismemberment are very, very unusual. I've been involved in 4 in the 18 years that I was a homicide detective. If you think of the time when this happened in the January, it's fair to say that the heating will probably have been on. Decomposition starts, and you are going to get an odour.
The ability to stay in the same house that at this point must absolutely be smelling of a dead body that most human beings would find absolutely horrifying. There's something about his thought process which is very dehumanizing, objectifying of this thing that was in the way that he's got rid of.
The police had seen the messages that Dean sent to me, and within them messages he tells me that he's chopped her up. He's watched the bin men taking away her body. Nobody has ever been found, no. There's no going back from it, is there, from what you've seen and what you've been told?
The motive for the murder remained unclear.
I cried. I sobbed. What person can beat somebody like that, you know, and still walk about and think it's fine? I think the more drugs they took and the harder their situation became, Dean probably took it out on her. I imagine it was probably a beating that went too far.
I don't think there was a world in which he thought he would get away with this murder. There was so much blood at this crime scene. There was no chance. Rebecca was the closest person to him, and he must have known that by contacting her and sharing this information, she was going to go to the police. It was game over for him at that point, I think.
It's a question I ask myself all the time. What do you think it was that finally made him tell everybody? I think he did trust me the most, yeah.
"32-year-old Kirby Noden was missing, but all the evidence strongly indicated that she had been murdered by her long-term boyfriend, Dean Lowe.
The reaction of the family was obviously worry, working out whether it was true, because it was so chaotic and wasn't completely out of character for Dean to say ridiculous stuff.
I didn't realise the gravity of the situation back then. I realise it now. And I say, you know, hindsight's 20/20. I wish I had called the police more. You know, I just wish I could have done more for her. But I couldn't.
Dean Lowe's trial began at Truro Crown Court almost a year later, on April 23, 2018. He was now aged 33.
Because Dean had confessed both to his cousin and also verbally to the police officer who attended the address, they had a confession. They had the crime scene and they had the murderer. I remember at the time when I was covering the case, this seemed very open and shut, but it wasn't.
He pleaded not guilty. It's not unheard of, people, homicide cases, to make admissions at the time. And then by the time it comes to trial, 9, 10, 12 months later, to have had a change of mind and plead not guilty. It's their right, it's the legal system. His addiction will have been addressed whilst he was in custody in prison, and therefore he will probably have more touch on reality and perhaps the impact of what he had actually done had started to hit home to him.
I didn't attend Cornwall, where the majority of the witnesses were. I was just at Preston Crown Court via a video link. I just gave the evidence. I know it sounds silly, but you kind of feel like you're betraying them a little bit, don't you?
When Dean stood on the witness box and took the oath, what he said surprised everyone in court.
Dean's story was that he had been attacked in his flat, raped by 2 men, and that Kirby had fled to South Africa. He said the whole thing was set up by Kirby and the 2 men. They were all involved in it together. And it was all just a ploy to get Kirby out of the relationship and to South Africa, where she could start a new life.
He also said that Kirby in the flat had taken off her colostomy bag and started spreading blood spatters around the flat to implicate him in the murder, to frame him, if you like.
Dean even went as far as to claim that while he was incarcerated in HMP Exeter, that he received a phone call from Kirby from South Africa in which she said, "You're now, you're stuck inside and I'm enjoying my new life."
He said that she was in South Africa, and I just thought, she's not. She's absolutely not. She's got a daughter, drug addiction, no money, probably no passport. So far-fetched that she would be somewhere so far away from Cornwall.
It gave a lot of false hope to Kirby's family members. It's very, very damaging to tell people who are in the process of grief, "Oh no, she's still alive." But it's completely false. He murdered her in cold blood in the home they shared together.
The trial lasted for over 2 weeks.
The whole time he sat there with a completely straight face. He showed no remorse.
The jury then went away to deliberate for 9.5 hours.
The verdict was guilty. The judge decided that Dean must spend a minimum 28 years in prison. The judge said the defence was utterly cruel lies and that Kirby had suffered a pitiless attack and Kirby had done nothing but love him devotedly.
Some of the jurors were so upset, visibly upset, crying, that a court usher had to hand them tissues. So it was a very emotional time.
When he got put in prison, I thought to myself, good. I'm glad that he can't hurt anyone else, you know, especially not another woman.
It was confusing because there was no body. They didn't know for definite that he'd done what he said he did. But he's got his sentence. That's what they think is right. That's what Kirby's mum feels is right. I know that she's died and that Dean's done it. I do know that. But I think it's just I don't want to accept it. I think he killed her because he took too many drugs. His head was messed up. The Dean I knew growing up would have never have done that to Kirby or anybody.
There must be a part of Rebecca that still loves him. That's her cousin, and she hates who he's become, but that's not who he always was. She remembers him as this really fun little kid playing with her in their nan's back garden. To know that you have to turn on him and give a statement in court, which she did, must have been incredibly hard.
It's a photo from my nana's house, so it just brings back nice childhood memories. Dean at that age, he was still quite a young, innocent child, just cheeky little face.
Coming to terms with Dean's crime has been difficult for Rebecca and her family.
I wonder all the time what he thinks about it all. What he thinks about me and whether he blames me for the police and for him being in prison. But I guess now in prison, you know, he's being fed. He can't access all these hard drugs. He can't do any harm to himself or to anyone else. So I kind of don't need to worry about him as much as I used to.
Not only did she lose Kirby, who was a really good friend of hers, but she also lost her cousin. She's lost that closeness, she's lost that family member. Those memories are tainted forever because of what he's done. This is a double tragedy, and the impact that it's had on the wider family members is massive.
If she fully accepts that this is what Dean has done, then at some level, she will have to rewrite the history that she had with him and revisit that and recalibrate that person she knew, but at the same time, she knows what he's done.
What makes a monster? You know, what makes somebody do this atrocious act? It's not just one thing. It's not just one flick of the switch. It's years in the making, years of drug use, a difficult childhood. All of those things matter and make a massive impact on a person and their actions.
If he'd remained outside, he would have been and continued to be a danger to the public. So he's in the best place for him and he's in the best place for us.
Dean needed help much, much earlier, and had help been provided and accepted, because there is a level of responsibility on his end, things could have turned out very differently.
The memory of Kirby stays with the ones whose lives she touched.
She was just brilliant. So welcoming. You could just not know her and you just feel like you'd known her forever. She's just one of them people.
She was really lovely. She had a really big heart. She cared a lot. I do think that she tried to protect me, and that spoke volumes. I wish you were still here. I wish you were able to have your daughter and have that properly.
It's unfair on Kirby's family. It's hard for our family as well. Kirby's family, we're friends of the family, and it's hard. There's a lot of guilt for us as well to know what they're going through. Obviously, I love him as a cousin and I'll always care about him, but I don't think that I'd ever be able to be in a room with him or even have a conversation with him again. It is hard to get what he's possibly done out of my mind.